it's a shame. And I've been working as a pediatrician, but with medically underserved communities and children facing adversity over 50 years now. And I'm still heartbroken to see a kid anywhere that wants to be a teacher, wants to be a doctor, wants to be whatever, but live in a
Mm-hmm.
place under circumstances where it's not possible. And that's really what keeps us in the game in Ukraine.
Hello, and welcome. This week on The Edge, we'll be speaking with Dr. Irwin Redlener. And I've known Irwin since the early days of the full-scale invasion out in Lviv when he was setting up what would eventually become the Ukrainian Children's Action Project. Because that's what Irwin does. He helps those who are most vulnerable, whether it is running a pediatric ICU in Miami or many of his other achievements and accolades. He is driven to be there in times of need, whether it is the aftermath of an earthquake or some massive storm or outbreak. And sadly, what happens in a war. So we discuss what needs to be done for these children and their parents here, now, today. Because eventually, these young ones are the ones that will grow up to take custody of this new nation. What kind of new democracy will they build, especially considering the disruption and the trauma that they are witnessing and living through now? And as fellow Americans, we also discuss what it means that the White House seems to be steering its foreign policy away from soft power, away from assistance. How can we continue to provide aid as U.S. citizens? And finally, what does it mean that the administration of Donald J. Trump seems to be turning its back on the children of Ukraine? What does that say about us? So, Dr. Irwin Redlener. Irwin, so pleased that you would agree to spend some time with us here at On the Edge. I've had the good fortune of working with you on some of your projects, but for my audience, tell the people what the Ukrainian Children's Action Project does.
Right. So let's just call it UCAP. And
Yep.
UCAP was founded by my wife, Karen, and me just a couple of months after the full-scale invasion in February 22. And we were very horrified to see what Russia was attempting to do and why to the sovereign democratic country of Ukraine. And we got started with this, really didn't know much about the area at all, but friend of ours, a iconic folk singer, Joan Baez, had raised money and wanted to help out, asked us what to do with the money, and we had no idea, so we came to look and meet people. And it didn't take long for us to get completely committed to helping. And our main expertise is helping through working with children impacted by war. Karen, I've been working with children facing adversities for many, many years, and this was a natural fit. We've been to the country 7 times now since we've started UCAP. And what we do is we raise money, and we use that money to support programs run by Ukrainians that deal with medical and health issues for children, including supporting programs in the Children's Hospital in Lviv, and also spent a lot of time thinking about the mental health, the psychological impact of war on children, and supporting those programs that help those kids. But final thing is educational disruption. We think eventually
Mm.
this war is going to be over, and the future of Ukraine will, in part, depend on how ready the younger generation is to assume responsibility for the long-term recovery and stabilization of Ukraine. So that's what we do.
It's interesting you say that because there's a lot of criticism that's brought on down on Ukraine about certain age groups that men in their young 20s, for example, who are not part of the mobilization process. Internationally, there's some criticism about that because I don't think people understand the demographic uh, and the age demographic of this country. Children are not being born in the aughts. Those who would be 20 now, 2025 now, would have been born in a period of great desperation,
Yeah, yeah,
crisis in Ukraine. And so they don't have the 20-year-olds to spare. And when we talk about additionally the children that you're referencing, there's also a consideration of their psychological well-being. And I think it says a lot about Ukrainians that they are looking forward, that they are considering that these generations cannot be just ignored in the case of children who are too young to go to fight, or even young men who in a different country might have been called up earlier. Have you experienced in your travels to Ukraine and your working with Ukraine the consideration that not only do they have to fight this war and win this war, but they have to care for future generations who will inherit a free and sovereign Ukraine? I wonder if you could talk to me a little bit about what you've encountered
yeah. Well,
in
we
that
first of
regard.
all, on the positive side, Ukrainians are extremely resilient, as are their children for the most part. And we've worked with many teenagers on a number of different programs. They are actually enthusiastic about the future. That's not to say there aren't a large number of children with, serious psychological impact like post-traumatic stress. But we, for example, work. There's a group of Ukrainians, kids, who participate in something called the Genius Olympiad, and they compete in Europe. And really, we help support a group of 50 of them that came to the United States last summer and competed against other groups of teenagers from 60 other countries. And they ran away with the Ukrainian kids ran away with prizes in robotics, in the arts, in documentary filmmaking. It was quite incredible. Those kids are looking forward to a peaceful future where they could develop themselves, their careers, their lives, and so on. Um, the being at war with a superpower is a damper on all that, and I think in some ways, for some kids, it's been stimulating and challenging, but they've accepted the challenge. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, there's going to be enormous work to do. We don't know what territories are going to be retained by Russia, which are not, and what are you going to do in those areas, and what about the kids that came from those communities on the front lines, in active battlefield communities, and there's going to be a lot of work to do. But the young people need to see a future for them to come back. We're funding a school for Ukrainian kids in Warsaw, Poland. And I met with them in December and asked each one of the high school kids, what do you want to do? What's next? And all of them are going for college or university, but like 85% are going to stay in Poland or other parts of Europe and not go back to Ukraine.
Mm.
So those are things that we really do have to work on.
Yeah, I want to circle back on that in a little bit, but I want to talk about a lot of what I know you do is involved with internally displaced people. Across the border in Poland as well. But like some of these people came from the occupied territories, where they were subject to the Russian, dominance. What stories, or those who were caught sadly along the conflict zone, what are some of the stories that you have heard of the sheer difficulty and trauma that these kids are going through?
Well, not just heard, Phil. I've made rounds in the children's hospitals where children who have been injured, badly injured, on the front lines in those communities that you're talking about have come for advanced treatment. So I've spoken to many children with, you know, severe limb injuries, metal plates in their skulls, horrendous stories of their lives being saved because dad threw the kids under the bed when they were being bombarded. So we there's a lot of stories of tragedy that are not hard to find in Ukraine, but that's a reality of being in a war zone, basically.
What do you think it means for an entire generation to have grown up in war? What do you are not only doing what you're doing now, but you have a long history of dealing with, child care and in trauma. What do you think it means to an entire generation of Ukrainians to grow up in
It's
conflict and
worrisome.
war?
It is worrisome. It's worrisome because education has been disrupted. It's worrisome because they've been psychologically traumatized. The whole thing is we want to get children in this country at war back to a sense of normalcy in their lives. School, friends, community, safe place to live, nutrition, the things that kids anywhere crave and need. And the country that they live in needs to be able to provide it, which is not the case right now. So, this war generation, which is what they are, like I was saying, many are resilient, but you still need an educational structure. You still need to be able to go to school regularly. If you're living in an occupied zone, we don't know what is happening with those children. You have thousands of children being kidnapped and brought back to Russia. The latest number was 20,000 or so. That's demoralizing for the country, for individual families. And I don't mean the families of the kids who are actually kidnapped. They're obviously struggling mightily. But the whole country gets demoralized when there's been a wholesale abduction of children, away from their families and into Russia.
Yeah, it's tragic, and we've talked about it on this channel several times. What are some of the specific projects that UKEP is doing in Ukraine to help not only the children but obviously the parents of these children?
Right. So, it ranges from building new pediatric operating rooms, state-of-the-art operating rooms in the referral hospital in Lviv. And they're beautiful. They're going to be back there when we open those, which will be in a couple of months. We built a youth resilience center for displaced children that provides a lot of after-school activities, cohesion in the community, educational catch-up, and so on. We're funding something called the recovery camps. These 6-day experiences for mothers and children who go and they come from occupied or near occupied zones. They spend 6 days. They're screened for severe mental health problems, and then they get referred if they need it. But just the 6-day camp is structured in a way that impacts positively mothers and their children.
The 24th six-day recovery camp has already started. These camps were created for families from deoccupied and frontline territories.
Гуляй поле.
Маріуполь,
Харків.
Мар'їнка,
Миколаїв,
Нова Каховка, Олешки, Енергодар, Очаків, Генічес.
So those are just some examples of the programs we're funding.
And they're great projects, Irwin, and I'm having had the pleasure of working alongside you and your lovely wife. I'm very grateful for the work that you do. But we have to talk and turn to an unfortunate topic, I think, as fellow Americans. And that is that increasingly it seems as though, well, in terms of like USAID, but further afield, I mean, like, it seems that America is withdrawing from the support that is needed here. And you're not the person to talk to about military affairs, but what are your thoughts on the idea that America is withdrawing its soft power support, support for the individuals, for those who are suffering in this war? What are your thoughts on that decision by this new administration?
Yeah, I've been following this, including the military support. And seems like it is an abandonment of a democratic ally who's actually fighting for the values that we cherish. And if Ukraine loses, that is a threat to democracy, certainly in Europe, but in the United States as well. This abandonment, because we should call it what it is, and this uncertainty of what Trump has on his mind is horrendously destructive. So I am deeply worried, Phil, about what this president and his administration are going to do. But I am worried that as long as this continues, which is no hope of no evidence of it letting up, really, we may get some kind of ceasefire, but at what cost to Ukraine? And then the withdrawal of the $5 billion a year that they were getting from USAID is devastating. So we have a president that is unpredictable, uninformed, unreadable, and it's a shock for many Americans to have this administration now in power in Washington.
And you know, it's not just as bad as the administration is. There's an entire movement behind him that will parrot anything he says. And so if he says Ukraine bad, they will say Ukraine bad. What do we, those of us who love Ukraine and recognize the urgency and the importance of supporting Ukrainians, how do we push back against this narrative that is born out of, you know, the cult leader saying Ukraine bad and then millions following along?
Well, I think we have
How do we push back?
Yeah. I think the people's ability to influence Donald Trump directly that's very, very limited. On the other hand, you have members of Congress who represent you in the Senate and the House of Representatives. And I think unrelenting pressure, at least for people that are living in the states that are voting and all, and you are too, I think there's every reason in the world to kind of go after the legislative branch and say, your behavior of going along with, as you say, the cult leader is not okay. We're abandoning a country that's defending our democracy. And just, that's it. The spoken word is helpful. They do get virtually every message, like when people call in. And the candidates that you think should be supporting Ukraine that aren't, you can influence them in different kinds of ways. But I think that's generally the structure of what we need to do.
Yeah, sadly, until we get to the midterms, if we get to the midterms, being vocal is about the best thing we can do. And so I know that you are going on shows and speaking your truth about Ukraine. Obviously, we have this show here. So it's just, I think it's really important for folks the most important thing you can do is spread the word. So thank you for doing that. And we're going to keep doing it here. But aside from all these issues of messaging, there's also some very pragmatic issues I think we should discuss in terms of when we look at, should a lack of military support from America in particular, or should things turn sour for Ukraine and they start losing territory in large scale, there's going to be another flood of immigrants, refugees, displaced people going into Europe. That will in turn put stress on their economy and on their structures. And, we're interconnected as much as the Trump administration would like to divide us.
There's no question about it. And, the issue that you're talking about people leaving Ukraine and not going back, we're talking about people who are going to emigrate to other countries, is one of many problems that Europe's going to have. They're going to have to replace the military security that Ukraine used to depend on the United States for. And, no matter what happens now, nobody's going to trust American commitments in terms of military support or treaties or whatever, and nor should they. So that means a whole realignment of chaos for a while in Europe, where Europe says, okay, we're going to have to now act as if we can't depend on the United States. So we're going to have to think about how NATO is structured, how the mutual security agreements are organized, how much we're spending on military. And for the frontline countries, the Baltic states and Poland, let's say, in particular, if Ukraine falls, God forbid, and we're dealing with Russia and Putin feeling their oats here, so to speak, all of those countries should feel alarmed and are going to have to make massive changes. So yes, there's going to be a flood of people from Ukraine, but that's one of many challenges Europe is going to have going forward.
You're a man who has traveled quite extensively. You've helped in places like Haiti. You've traveled far and wide. What is it about Americans, do you think it is, that makes us so isolationist sometimes? Why can't we recognize that what happens here in Ukraine affects Europe, what happens in Europe affects us, even though we have these large oceans to ostensibly protect us? What is it about us?
That question would not even be asked 5, 10 years ago. These are questions that have come up. 80 years, NATO's been a powerful force and a message to countries that live in dictatorships, basically, who are aggressive, is basically don't mess with us. I know this is a family show, so I'm saying don't mess with us, but you could fill in your own words here. But you know what I mean? It's like nobody would think that it would be an easy objective to invade a NATO country until day before yesterday, basically. And we have this situation where Donald Trump is upending everything. So there have been periods of serious isolationism in the United States, especially before we got into World War II. There was a very large faction of Americans, America firsters and isolationists, who said, we don't give a damn what Hitler's doing in Europe. We're not getting involved. And that was a force in the United States. But after World War II, we became part of this massive alliance at NATO and other security arrangements, and we were part of the family. That's the way it was. It just isn't right now. It just isn't, Phil. And
No.
And it's heartbreaking, as I think you used that word earlier. It is heartbreaking that our country is changing. The problem is that, and the people in Ukraine should understand that the turmoil that is being seen in our foreign policy and the upending of our commitments to Ukraine and to Europe is part of an agenda that is affecting every aspect of life in America, from massive changes in Department of Education to putting actual nut jobs in senior positions in the cabinet. I mean, it's one end to the other. So the American worry list for normal people that are not in the cult is a long list, and Ukraine is is on the list, maybe the head of the list, but not the only. It's not the only issue that is making the country feel torn.
And there's a certain cruelty to it as well. I mean, obviously, part of the problem with this new administration is that things are so fluid and chaotic. By the time we publish this, it might be completely different. But as it stands today, it's my understanding they're even talking about kicking out people who have sought refugee status in the United States. And this is reminiscent of what we did with Jewish refugees fleeing the tyranny of
That's
Hitler's
correct.
Germany.
That's correct.
But why kick people out that have already come to the United States to seek refuge and who are doing nothing but being peaceable contributor society? What's your thought?
Contributing.
Yes, what's your thought of the idea
Well,
of kicking out Ukrainian refugees?
Yeah, the Ukrainian refugee community in the United States is terrified. Like literally, they're not. We work with a number of people here, and Karen is on the board of a wonderful organization called Brave Generation of you. Somebody's organized a whole program for bringing Ukrainian kids for university and graduate school education, with a commitment that they'll go back after they're trained, etc. The leader of that is a brilliant young woman, and she is terrified to go out on the streets, that she'll get picked up. But they're talking about the deportation of a couple 100,000 Ukrainians to where, I don't know. She comes from near Mariupol, so there's no place
Yeah,
for her to
can't go
go.
back to it's occupied. So yeah, you can't send her back to Mariupol. It's disgraceful and deeply disheartening to me. Um, but uh, what can we do? Those of us who are in the community who are supportive of Ukraine,
Yeah.
particularly in America, what can we do to support these amazing Ukrainian people who need our help right now?
He's talking about the Ukrainians in Ukraine, like the country, right?
Yeah, Ukrainians in Ukraine, but I think also the diaspora. But generally, how do Americans who find the behavior of the Trump administration abhorrent when it comes to Ukraine and Ukrainians, people who are suffering
Yeah.
from a war they didn't deserve, what can those of us who hold Ukraine in our hearts dear do you think, to support them now in this dire time of need? Because apparently America has turned its back.
The American government has turned its back.
Yes, those Americans who
Yeah.
see the
Yeah.
decency of helping
I made
Ukrainians.
that
What can we do?
I'm making that distinction because
I agree.
a lot of sympathy and among Americans and a desire to help them. And I think the thing to do is, like I said before, is pressure on your representatives is the best possible thing you could do, including Democrats. Everybody is cowering before this Trump figure. And it's no joke. I mean, Republicans are getting threatened with primaries funded by Elon Musk if they don't go along with the Trump agenda. But Democrats and Republicans are getting threatened by MAGAs. I mean, lives are being threatened. So, but people have to stand up. You want to be in Congress, then you have to pay attention to the will of your constituents. There's just no two ways about it.
You know, one of the things that I did working with UKIP was one day I went out to the Superhuman Center with your wife and co-founder of UKIP, Karen Redlener. And I was astounded. This is a center for people who have lost limbs, soldiers fighting on the front lines.
Correct.
And instead of going to a place of despair and of sadness and trauma and difficulty, it was surprisingly uplifting because none of the spirit of the Ukrainian people had been damaged, despite their bodies being torn apart. So that's what compels me to keep working on behalf of Ukrainians. But I wonder if I could give you the opportunity to tell our fellow Americans the nature of the Ukrainian people and why it is we really should be supporting them. With that in light, what I've told you about the Superhuman Center event.
Well, let me make a statement, and I'll work backwards from that. So the statement is that Ukraine is a spectacular country. Its culture, its art, its technological prowess, its educational institutions of higher education are state of the art. It is, and it's beautiful. And Lviv is a World Heritage City. It's beautiful. You're talking about a country and a people that are quite remarkable. And that leads me to say that if the war was over, or the war hadn't happened, I visited there, I would want to spend a lot of time in Ukraine. And I think that most Americans would. I kind of half jokingly say to a lot of the people we work with, as soon as the war's over, you got to find me an apartment in Lviv someplace. You and I've spent time in Lviv.
Mm-hmm.
You have taken me to the magnificent restaurants. It's a remarkable
It's a
place.
lovely city. And it's not alone. And there are lots of lovely cities in Ukraine.
I know. And the whole country is filled with an energy that's palpable. And that should become a place that Americans are craving to go to, like going to, you're going to Paris this year? No, we're not. We're going to Kyiv. We're going to go wherever. We're going to go to Odessa. We're going to visit a magnificent country. You could spend weeks as a tourist in that country, as you well know. And and by the way, on the bigger picture side, listen, these people want, what do people want? Including Russian people, regular people, normal people. They want a job. They want to live in a nice, safe place. They want their kids to go to school. They want to go to the movies on the weekend or whatever they want to do. They want to have a place that's affordable to shop. People crave normalcy, and I think that is a universal truth that I found, in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Uganda, in everywhere basically, and nowhere more than in Ukraine. It's not like the Ukrainian people are saying, "Yeah, we got to go. We're going to take over as much as we can of Western Russia." That's Nobody wants that. It's the grown-ups that want that. It's the leaders who are craven. It's it's people who have the power to make us do bad things, really. And it's a shame. And I've been working as a pediatrician, but with medically underserved communities and children facing adversity over 50 years now. And I'm still heartbroken to see a kid anywhere that wants to wants to be a teacher, wants to be a doctor, wants to be whatever, but live in a
Mm-hmm.
place under circumstances where it's not possible. And that's really what keeps us in the game in Ukraine.
Well, I have seen you many times. One of the things that I have seen you do, Irwin, repeatedly when you go meet people, when you open a cultural center or a school or whatever, when you talk to these children, one of the things that you repeatedly do is ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And implicit in that question is, what do you see your future as being?
That's the question.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be an artist.
Oh, great.
Oh, he wants to be a soldier, a military guy.
Okay, good luck. Yeah.
Ветеринар.
Ветеринар, a vet doctor.
That's the question that you pose. And I see right through you, Dr. Irwin Redlener. I know exactly what you're doing with that question. You're not just asking, what do you want to be when you grow up and become an astronaut or a fireman? You're asking, what do you see the future as being for you? Why is it so important that you ask that question to the children of Ukraine?
Yeah, because that tells me that the country's future is worth everything. In other words, if you need a motivation to create peace and opportunity for children, those children, that's just what they're telling you. Phil, I think it was before we met you. I don't remember, but it was at an orphanage in Lviv.
Mm-hmm.
It was when the Russians really started going after Western Ukraine. And these kids, the orphanage had been mostly cleared out. There were a dozen kids left. And we got there on a day when the night before was the first intense bombing of some kind of electrical grid facilities not too far from this orphanage. So they had to go down into a basement which had no electricity, no phone service, and the teachers or the staff and these dozen children spent the night there listening to bombs and air raid alerts. So Karen and I get there the next day, really the day after, hours after they came up. And I have video of this where I went around, they were standing outside. I asked every one of them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And these kids who were just spent a night of terror as bombs were falling. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a computer scientist. I want to be a cop. And I wrote this up, and I also have the video of it. And the last girl says, and maybe she was 9, she says, I want to be president. I said, president of what? Ukraine. Well, it is so clear that these kids, they don't want to be warriors. They want to do stuff like, sort of, it's a universal reality for children that they hold the keys to the future. There's this kind of cliche, children are our future. Well, it's actually true. And to hear kids talk in a way that they own that concept, not the adults, the children themselves own it, has been the ongoing motivation for me in all these decades doing the work that we do, and manifested in Ukraine in this very dramatic way. I can't even imagine it. I can't even imagine this.
You've also touched on something there that I think is really important for us as Americans to think about. As our democracy is under threat, and I think that's indisputable. I think you can't argue that. Our democracy is under threat currently. Here in Ukraine, I am reminded almost daily that these people want to build a democracy. That little girl wants to be president, and she thinks she can be president. because
Totally.
Ukraine, despite the narrative that Moscow would have us believe, is genuinely building a democracy here. And they have been looking to us, and sadly, we're failing as an example. But hopefully, maybe we can be reinvigorated by their example instead of building a true democracy, a
That's a
hopeful
very good
democracy.
point. Yes, exactly.
I wonder what your reaction to that
Well,
is.
well, first of all, you said our democracy's under threat. And to me, expressing it that way suggests that something might happen. I think it actually is happening. It's not under threat. I think, well, it is under threat, but it's also under assault actively. Dismantling of democratic institutions, just dismissing the idea of guardrails and separation of powers, and between the judiciary and the legislative and the executive branches of government. It's underway, man. This is like it's worse than a lot of us could have imagined, actually, to that point. And I don't think I'm being too extreme about it. I think that is objectively what is happening. That we're under attack. Our democracy's under attack. And maybe, we're very like narcissistic as a country. We think the entire universe revolves around the United States.
Myopic. We're very much
Myopic. Yeah,
self-involved.
yeah.
Yeah.
What if we imagine a scenario where the U.S. fades as the role model, and it is, France with Macron, it's the UK, it's Germany, it's the Czech Republic, it's Poland, of all places, that stands up and says, "Yeah, we all have democracies, and we're going to do it, and we don't need the United States to do it." And maybe our place, the hegemony that used to be, Pax Americana, is going to be no more, and that the world order, the other cliche is, we're disrupting the world order, which we are. Maybe there's a new world order, and maybe it'll be okay, and not a world order that many of us fear, that's controlled by autocracies and dictatorships and people who are anti-democratic, like the Russians or I don't know the Chinese are much more complicated
Well, no,
geopolitical
certainly
force.
with the Russians, I think you're absolutely right. You're certainly with the Russians there. And in your list of Western democracies, and I suspect you did this on purpose, but in your list there of Western democracies, you purposely, I think, left out Ukraine. But I'm going to raise Ukraine to the top of that list. And I'll do it not just because of Zelensky and the prime example he's shown as a leader of a Western liberal democracy, again, despite what Moscow's narrative is. The people of this nation are fighting not just for their territory, not just for their soil, not just for borders, but because they genuinely believe in a way of life that is contrary to what Moscow portrays. And that's why they're fighting so hard. And that's why I
Yeah,
think they're a prime example for all of us. I wonder if you could respond to
I
that.
know. I think that's absolutely true, and this is one of the things that riles up Putin, who
Mm-hmm.
he wants Ukraine to go, spiritually, philosophically east, and Ukraine wants to go west. Ukraine, even before this full scale invasion, was a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
But still is a democracy,
Still is.
and it's a democracy that's not got its eyes to the east. Its role models have not been Russia. And this is why, Putin claiming that it's part of Greater Russia, it doesn't exist as a country, Ukraine, it's run by Nazis and all this other BS that comes out of Putin's mouth, which characterizes really wh- their philosophy and what's really behind. They ostensibly saying we don't want Ukraine in NATO, but it's really a deeper question that we don't want Ukraine to be a Western democracy on our border. We don't want it, and they're exerting their power to try to force the situation and keep keep Ukraine from the alliances that it much more naturally wants and its people want, which is to the west.
Well, and also I think that their narrative that there is no difference between Russians and Ukrainians is a slightly double-edged sword for them, because for Moscow, if Ukraine can build the kind of democracy that it is trying to build, then maybe their own people in the Russian Federation will look at this and say, well, you've been telling us all along that we're basically one people. They're doing pretty well as a democracy. Why can't we do that? I think that threatens the Kremlin.
I think it does.
Democracy's infectious.
Yeah, and for good reason. For good reason.
I agree with you. As difficult as it is right now in the States and the crisis that we're having there, I still believe in it, and I believe it here too. So I don't know how you feel
Me
about
too,
that.
Phil. Me too. No, I totally
Look, buddy.
agree with you. Yeah,
I'm gonna let you go. It's been lovely talking to you, but I want to highlight the Ukrainian Children's Action Project and your efforts here. We'll of course be adding a link down below. But as America seems to be withdrawing in its soft power application here in Ukraine, you're not going anywhere, I suspect. What is the future for UKEP?
to keep on going unrelentingly, supporting Ukrainians and Ukrainian children, because, like we discussed, Ukrainian children deserve to be able to fulfill that destiny. And if they do, the little kids who say, "I want to be a cop, an interior designer, an architect, or president," that's really that's the future. That's what it is, and we're very connected to that mission. We're not letting up, and that we're going to work. We're working politically in the states. We're raising as much money as we can, and as long as I can travel, we'll be seeing you.
You know you are always welcome here. You know that you are always welcome at my table, and with great gratitude for the efforts that you do here. And I'm really privileged to not only know your efforts, but to call you friend. So
Listen,
thank you,
Phil,
Irwin.
listen, I appreciate that, but you should know also that your ability to get the word out is absolutely critical. There's no advocate, there's no activist that gets anything done without people in journalism, in the media, carrying that message. Otherwise, we're just sitting around our room here, just who am I talking to? Karen will always listen to me. There's no question about that. But
She kind of has to.
she has to, and it's, by the way, it's mutual. It's mutual.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I know.
appreciate the opportunity to speak with you always.
Well, let's keep doing what we're both doing and hope for the best. And I think what's good for Ukraine ultimately is good for you, for the USA as well. So I appreciate your efforts and everything you do. It's been great talking
Thanks.
to you.
Bye bye.